vineyard manager, supervisor, winemaker, many labels realistically.
Yeah, yep, that just about sums it up.
Thank you very much for being here, first of all, and thank you very much for giving up your evening. We're
My
currently
pleasure.
enjoying. I'm finishing off my beer, and then we've got some nice wine with us as well. So I'm hoping that can, to butter you up a bit. Fingers crossed. It seems a bit sacrilegious to not have a glass of wine with you, given your area of expertise.
Yeah, well, it's sacrilegious not to have wine on most occasions, to be honest. So
Very fair.
yeah,
Very fair indeed. First of all, I know I just did it before, but thank you very much for being here. Extremely appreciate it.
my
Very
pleasure.
keen to unpack this a lot more with yourself and get to know the industry and the role and that kind of thing. We'll get into our fast five or first five like we do in good fashion. Pros and cons of being a viticulturist, in the wine industry in general.
Yeah, lots of pros, to be honest. I can't, hard to think of cons, although, halfway through harvest, which we are at the moment, the early mornings do start to get to you, but it's just so fun. I don't even know where to begin. It's
I can imagine being quite taxing.
yeah, I mean,
It's like,
definitely,
it's hard work.
it's quite physical work most of the time, depending on specifically what your role is. But my role is generally quite physical. But I mean, that's good. Keeps me fit, and but no, it's very fun. It feels like, for me, I've always sort of thought of it as a really nice blend of, it's sort of quite creative, quite sort of artsy, but then it's also it's study and it's work based in science. So I think it's a really cool cool mix of those two things, and so lots of room to sort of be yourself and be creative, be who you need to be, but also lots to learn, lots to master in terms of the sort of sciencey kind of aspect of it. I think it's really cool.
Very fair. Very, very fair. Were there any cons in there?
Well, again, the early mornings
sorry,
during harvest, and I'm working up in the Adelaide Hills, so it's not exactly the warmest part of the world at 5 o'clock in the morning, but I mean, for the most part, I do enjoy that anyway, and some long hours, but it's all good fun.
Very fair. All right. Key attributes and skills or traits. What's some sort of key attributes someone should have to be in the wine industry, winemaker?
So I think for me, if I was looking to hire someone or to get someone to work for me, I think honestly the first question or the first thing I would make sure people are prepared for is just to work hard. I've worked with people who know their stuff and intelligent and well studied and whatnot, and I've worked with people that are working a vintage just to get a bit of cash to travel or to study, and honestly I've preferred working with most of the latter, because at the end of the day, if you're happy to put your head down and get your hands dirty, I think you're well on your way to being a good person in the industry. It's not an easy, it's hard to kind of hide in the wine industry if you're a bit lazy or a bit unmotivated. I think it's pretty usually pretty clear. So
I mean, that's very fair. We're in South Australia, so it's a small place. Everyone seems to know everyone. Reputations get around.
Exactly, and that goes for employers as well. It's a very small industry and in a small world. So it's not easy to get away with much. But and then obviously, if you're looking to be in a more sort of technical role, then definitely I think study, of some sort, you sort of probably can't get away without it.
Need some form of history, evidence of understanding the basic composition of wine.
Exactly, yeah. But no, like I said, 80% of it is just working hard, putting your head down.
All right. Growth opportunities. What kind of obviously you've got entry level, and then similar to yourself, you've got vineyard supervisor and that kind of thing, and then making your own vintage or getting your own label. Like, how's that kind of look?
Yeah, it's it's a really dynamic industry. I think there's I've met a lot of people that have just sort of done a vintage or two for a bit of cash and happy to leave it at that and leave their work at work, or you can really sort of go a long way with it. I've been really fortunate to travel overseas and work. It's an industry that even in sort of non-English speaking countries, it's we're making wine in a reasonably similar way. So it's it's a really transferable industry in that sense. So lots of growth, outside of Adelaide, in my case, but in terms of a career, there's a lot of different ways you can take it. The Australian Wine Research Institute, which is, that's fully sort of government funded and industry funded, does a lot of, really incredibly technical work around research and development of products and whatnot. There's obviously the bigger companies like the multinational companies, within which there's a lot of room for growth as well. You can just sit on a tractor and listen to podcasts and hang out all week.
So either way, it sounds pretty cool. And I do like the avenue you can sort of. It sounds like there's multiple pathways to follow your niche and what kind of interests you like. And again, like the fact you got to travel, I so want to ask you about that because it sounds bloody awesome.
Yep. It's such a cool industry for that, and even just people that I've studied with, the amount of different things we've all gone on to do, that are sort of vaguely within the wine industry. I think it's really cool.
Very fair. We mentioned before, some form of accreditation or learning. I can see on the wall here that you've got a very fancy degree in front of us. You're looking very professional.
Thank you. I didn't deliberately sit myself under it.
Very fair. I should say you absolutely didn't. But you do look great in the photo as well. So we're talking, viticulture, whatnot. So I'm assuming you do need some form of qualification.
So there's definitely plenty of roles within wine where you don't. But then I think it just depends where you want to take it. It is an industry. It's not like being a doctor or a lawyer where you absolutely need accreditation, but it certainly goes a long way depending on the role that you're sort of interested in. Obviously, some of the roles are very science-based, research-based, so they're absolutely, that's a bare minimum, having a degree. So my role at the moment, it was, you could, I think if someone really liked reading books, they could probably, in their own time, they could probably, do okay. But I, essentially got offered my job because I was coming out of uni and, so I think depending on where you want to take it, absolutely, study's the way to go. And the program at Adelaide Uni is amazing. So I was really fortunate to go through and do that.
Nice. All right. The big one everyone wants to know, salary range. What kind of coin, cheddar, cheese are we talking?
Again, like the rest of the industry, very varied. If you're looking at just being a vintage casual, the money can be really quite good. Some of the bigger wineries will do night shifts, so you might work from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. 6 days a week during harvest. So that's on penalty rates and casual pay, so you can do quite well for yourself. But obviously, it's harvesting. Might go for 6 weeks, might go for 12 weeks. It's sort of no way of knowing. But in terms of a permanent position like mine, sort of straight out of uni, you're probably looking at sort of 60 to 70k a year. But then with qualifications, with a bit more experience, definitely sort of getting closer to six figures. And then there's, like I've sort of mentioned, there's the research roles. There's roles within bigger companies where you might be doing a lot less sort of physical work, a lot less labour sort of work. But again, it's very much relying on a lot of experience, and so it can be quite financially rewarding. It's not, it's definitely not the
Probably not the thing that you target to get into this
No,
sector.
that's probably would be my, if there's one thing I'd say to people looking to get into it, I think it's, for me and a lot of people I know, it's a labour of love. We really love what we do, and so ultimately the money's not why we're here. And I think, especially at the moment, the way the industry is, it's not I think if that's why you're getting into it, I'd probably look at mining or something.
There's always more profitable industries, and
exactly.
Obviously, the world costs to live. Fuel prices. Fucking hell, let's not get started there. But I mean, shit. But I don't think that should be the be all and end all of why someone gets a job. You've got to have much more passion than just the paycheck you're taking at home. And this definitely sounds like one of those roles in industries. But still good money though. Let's be fair.
Oh, exactly.
I'd love to know the if there's some benefits as well. You get a cheeky case of wine every now and then, or you're literally tasting different vintages and such. Like, is my fantasy, and please correct me if I'm wrong there, but there's probably some good perks that come along with it, would be my guess. I'm not sure, but maybe.
No, very much so. We always sort of joke, within the industry that, one of the sort of running jokes is that just about everything that has alcohol in it is a tax deduction.
I mean, that's a good perk.
Essentially every bottle of wine. Well, I think there's at some point the ATO puts a limit on it, but within reason, any bottle of wine I buy, I can, try my luck with the accountant.
That's a pretty good perk. Let's be fair.
That's a very good
research perk.
And exactly.
That's very fair.
And that extends to having dinner with friends, with a partner, with your family, whoever it is. If there's alcohol being served and purchased, that can essentially, you again, depending on who your accountant is, you can always try your luck.
Very fair. I mean, we're all above board.
Exactly,
fair,
definitely.
You do need to research different vintages and flavours understandable.
Yeah.
That's our fast five done. So pressure's off. Everything now is cruisy, no pressure. This is quite nice. We're drinking a Longview
really
Pinot Grigio. I got to admit, for someone that's not traditionally a white drinker, that's actually really good.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I've always loved what Longview do, and Pinot Grigio is not my, I wouldn't, not my desert island white variety, but it's I think, Pinot Grigio is, it's always been pretty known for being very easy drinking, just nice and fresh and fun, and ultimate sort of summer.
Very fair.
Summer afternoon wine.
You said bring a Pinot. Did you mean a Pinot Noir?
I think that was my.
You meant a Pinot Noir.
Yeah. So.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to try. I love just trying anything.
Sorry, guys, I'm an absolute idiot. I've just brought a vintage. You're like, what are you doing?
It's all good. No, I do. Yeah, definitely partial to a Pinot Noir. Where I work, that's probably the. We essentially all we grow is Pinot and Chardonnay for sparkling wine. So, yeah, definitely a big fan of a good Pinot. And living and working in the Adelaide Hills, very fortunate that I don't have to travel far to find some pretty incredible wine.
That's for sure. Yeah. I'm very sorry then. I brought a crisp white when you were probably for a nice soft red.
I love a crisp white.
I used to be all about the Pinots, and then my wife has ruined me. She's from the Barossa, heavy Shirazes, Cab Savs, maybe a Merlot or a blend.
Yeah.
So now I love a heavy red. Yeah. So Pinot Noir tastes like water to me now.
Yeah, we love our cousins in the north.
We're very lucky here in South Australia.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're spoiled, and especially within Australia, there's no other city where from the CBD within an hour you can be in about 5 different wine regions. I cannot think of another place in the world where that's sort of, well, certainly not in Australia. That's just unheard of. Sydney's got the Hunter, but I think it's 2 hours. And then the Yarra from Melbourne, I think, is an hour and a half if you're sort of on the outskirts of the city. So we're so fortunate. I've had roles, had jobs in the past where I've worked either in the hills or down in McLaren Vale, and lived in the city or in the inner suburbs, and so sort of getting the best of both worlds of a beautiful job in a beautiful part of the world, but still being, especially when I was a bit younger, being able to live near the city and enjoy that side of life.
It's a good lifestyle, that's for sure.
We're so lucky here, and again, I've been really lucky to travel, to different wine regions across the world, and met lots of people traveling to Adelaide from other parts of the world, and we certainly compare to some of the best in the world in terms of lifestyle, quality of wine. We're very lucky.
Is there something about the wine industry where you have to, try different vintages and you have to travel? Because the wine som that we had on as a guest, I think their episodes dropped quite recently. They've done a lot of travel as well in New Zealand, and they've done a bit in Europe, and it seems like between that individual and yourself that there's been a lot. You guys do travel for work, which is pretty cool. Is there a reasoning why? Just to extend your palate, to understand, do they craft wine differently? Can I ask, what's that all about?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's I think from my point of view as someone who works in sort of production and vineyard, growing and making wine, I think there's only so much you can read about or listen about in a lecture or a podcast or whatever it might be. There's definitely there's only so much you can learn sitting at the sitting in a cafe. So it's definitely I think the way people approach winemaking, viticulture in especially different parts of Europe, which are have been making wine for in some cases sort of 7,000 or 8,000 years. The way people approach things in other parts of the world is you can't. There's sort of no substitute for just getting there and getting involved and
be more hands-on.
Obviously with wine distribution the way it is, you can from here I can go to the bottle shop 5 minutes away and try some incredible wines from some really amazing parts of the world. But so to I think to drink it and to talk about it in that sense is easy enough to do from the dining table. But there's definitely there's things that you can't necessarily learn from a book.
Very fair.
Yeah.
Okay. Where have you recently travelled without me being too nosy?
No, all good. So I've been lucky enough to work in California.
Wow. Jesus. Okay.
So down sort of on it's like the central coast of California. So in a wine region called Santa Barbara County. So it's sort of about 2 hours south of the Napa Valley, which is probably their sort of more famous.
Very well known.
That's definitely, I think it's in some Hollywood films and whatnot. But Santa Barbara County is a little bit more, I guess of a hidden gem, especially. I'll be honest. When I was looking for work in the Northern Hemisphere, I'd never heard of Santa Barbara. I'd never heard of the winery that I was ended up working at, but they, it just worked out that I could get a job there and get a visa for the States. And, I think in hindsight, I'm really lucky, really grateful that I sort of wound up there, even though I wouldn't have probably picked it. Beautiful part of the world. California's stunning and some really cool wines and some, really, really cool people.
Am I on the right pathway of, I'm thinking, crisp, dry whites kind of thing, being quite dry and hot? Am I...
definitely some. It's sort of where I worked specifically, lots of Chardonnay, lots of Sauvignon Blanc, but probably mostly reds. Lots of Syrah, which we call Shiraz here mostly. Fair bit of Cabernet, a little bit of Pinot Noir. I think if I'm being honest, it's probably a bit warm in the central coast of California for Pinot, and they're sort of starting to figure that out, which is it's a shame because there were some really cool ones. But definitely Santa Barbara is a bit more. Napa Valley is very much known for Cabernet, and that's about it really. Whereas Santa Barbara's definitely got some. It's a bit younger. It's a bit more. in terms of a workforce, and so the lifestyle's a bit different, and the wines that people are drinking, a little bit lighter, a bit more easy drinking.
Okay.
But yeah, and then last year went to Switzerland, Georgia, and Armenia.
Bloody hell.
Travelled around some wine regions there, and yeah, that was stunning. Obviously quite different, well, very different. It's sort of not where you think of, when you think of fine wine, especially.
You're thinking Italian, you're thinking
exactly. Especially in the case of Switzerland, they're bordered by Italy, France, I think Germany. Some of the more sort of famous wine producing countries in the world. So it's definitely. I think I heard somewhere when I was over there that they export something like 2% of the wine that they make.
Only 2?
Yeah, so it's very much, if you're in Switzerland, you're probably drinking Swiss wine. They're very very proud of their wine, which is great, and a lot of it's really beautiful stuff. So, but then Georgia and Armenia, that was fascinating. Those are countries that we've sort of through essentially like archaeology and some other sort of sciences, we've been able to people have figured out that those were obviously that it wasn't called Armenia back then or Georgia, but those parts of the world is it's the first parts of Europe that ever grew grapevines to make wine sort of deliberately, and it was the first the first places in the world that were producing wine, as we sort of know it today, to sell to get to get yourself on your way, and so they have incredible history, and they've again a lot of pride in that history, and so the way they approach things now, 8,000 years later, is still very much, with obviously some of the technology's obviously been updated.
Well,
but
you'd hope so.
Yeah,
maybe a bit more efficient to say.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's got to be a pro. That you're getting to experience different avenues of wine and how it's created and fermented and all those kind of things. Can you take us through, because early on you mentioned there's quite a lot of science involved, which I think a lot of individuals would very quickly look over. They're looking over the complexity that goes into a bottle of wine and just into, tastes good, I like it. Can you take us through a little bit of how that kind of looks? What a standard vintage would look like,
in terms of production in the vineyard or the winery, or
both? Sure, anything.
Yeah, well, how long have we got? It's
maybe the short
version.
Look,
there's a lot to it, and as a person who spends more time in the vineyard, I think I'm probably biased, and I certainly don't mean to whinge, but I think there's definitely I think that part of it gets a little bit sort of overlooked sometimes, and there's a lot that goes into wine before it even exists as a grape, let alone as a finished product. So lots of obviously in the vineyards, lots of work on tractors. Lots of pruning through which we sort of do through winter. Then depending on where you are, you've sort of got your disease pressures in spring when your shoots start growing. So that in sort of the southern hemisphere, so in Australia, that's obviously sort of starts in spring and grows through summer, and then we harvest in generally sort of February, March, April, depending on where you are, depending on what you're growing. And then from there the winery teams take over and ferment our beautiful grapes and turn it into beautiful wine.
Very fair.
Yeah, so it's I mean, that's the very, very abridged version, but
I can imagine there's a lot more complexity that's obviously involved in there.
Yeah.
Where do you sit on pesticides or preservatives, I guess, in wine? Because that's a big topic at the moment, from the individuals that I talk to, not in the sector, but, some are, I've drunk 3 bottles of wine and it's the preservatives that have given me the headache, not the 3 bottles. And I hate that, I open the bottle and it's got no preservatives or it's vegan friendly and 2 days later it's gone bad.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, it's a very interesting. Yeah, it's a big. Yeah, it's a point of interest for sure. You know, from us as sort of industry people. You know, because obviously we're ultimately led by what's happening in the market, and obviously consumers are getting more and more aware of different things, and you know, pesticides, herbicides, and then obviously your preservatives, your sulfur and whatnot are, you know, probably 20, 30 years ago weren't mentioned, weren't cared about, but it's definitely, yeah, it's a big thing. And so there's always a lot of work and research going into some alternatives. You know, there's certainly a big sort of natural wine movement, as it's known, and you know, they're sort of that's a group of producers that are obviously, you know, trying to avoid all of those sorts of things if they can. I probably sit on the fence, if I, you know, if I can say so. It's sort of, there's certainly some things that we have to do, that in a perfect world I wouldn't. But then if we want to grow grapes and if we want to make wine and ultimately, obviously, if we want to make money and survive as an industry, there's definitely some things we're sort of, yeah, a bit hamstrung about, and it's sort of, yeah, it's a necessary evil in some cases. But having said that, there has already been enough work and research into some slightly more environmentally friendly and people friendly ways to go about some of that sort of stuff. But I definitely, like I said, probably sit on the fence, and you know, I do just sort of think in terms of things like sulfur and preservatives. If you're gonna, I think for me, you know, having made my own wine and you know, worked in some really incredible wineries, there's a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of time, a lot of money. You know, I think the last thing you'd want is to put a product in a bottle without sulfur because you're worried about people's perceptions of that product or of the sulfur. And then, like you sort of mentioned, you make this beautiful, incredible wine. Someone puts it in their cellar for 5 years, you know, 2 years, 10 years, whatever, and they open it and it looks and tastes like Vegemite. It's a lot of wasted effort essentially. And so I think for me, I sort of justify, you know, specifically something like sulfur as a sort of, I've gone to a lot of effort to get it to this point, to be in a bottle or to be in a glass. And I think it's, yeah, and it's definitely not, I mean, there's sulfur in a lot of food, a lot of, a lot of things that aren't wine. I think wine just sort of gets a, you know, it's obviously a buzzword in the industry and for consumers, but I think there's definitely, yeah, there's sulfur in things that people probably don't realise. And you know, would I eat or drink a bucket of it? Absolutely not. But you know, would I put you know, 0.1 of a mil in a bottle of wine to make sure it tastes good in 5 years? Absolutely.
I think that's a fair trade-off. Let's be honest. I mean, it's different strokes for different folks. Let's be honest, and you can't please everyone. But I mean, there's an avenue where you've made the wine intentionally around, you know, the flavour you're trying to get, or based on the vintage. And I love the complexity that comes around that. You know, whether it's been a dry year, or it's been a wet year. I think a lot of people forget that there's going to be variances from year to year as well. You know, there's just the assumption that it's going to be the exact same in the bottle, you know, for 10 years straight, and that's not always possible. There's so many different factors there, which I find, you know, fascinating. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think, you know, certainly in some of the sort of smaller companies, you know, that's celebrated, you know, as winemakers, as grape growers, and then ultimately as consumers. You know, I think that's the beauty of it. Like you say, different years. You know, this year's we're harvesting quite late, so that's going to have a certain effect on the wine, or you know, ultimately. But in 2 years, 3 years, when we're releasing the wines we're currently processing, you know, we'll be able to talk about that. And next year, when it's, you know, who knows, too early to say, but, you know, if next year's quite early and warm and, you know, very different to this year, then again, that's, you know, for me, that's sort of half the beauty in making something like wine.
Yeah, it's quite an impressive feat. You know, you've made your own wine, your own it's almost like leaving your mark on the world. You know, you go, yeah, the 2021, whatever it was, that was my year, that was my thing. There's got to be a bit of pride that comes with that, and even if you keep it on the shelf for 20 years and it goes bad, you still go, I made that.
No,
you've
absolutely.
got a tangible thing that I can imagine that's quite rewarding.
Yeah, no, big time. It's it's a sort of snapshot in time, I suppose, and each year is so different, and again, I think for me there's a real beauty to that, and definitely, again with places I've worked, with my own wines that I've made, just being able to sit down and enjoy the fruits of my labour, however many years down the track. I think it's really cool to sit and reflect on that little period of time, and specifically as a winemaker, when it's think about the vintage, think about the year, the weather, whatever it might be.
There's a lot that goes into it as well, not just the sheer liquid that goes in the bottle, but you've got a label design, you've got bottle shape, you've got how much I'm assuming production comes from the grapes, and we can go down that pathway of clean skins and all those kind of things. It is a complex job, and I do think it's, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, it's definitely a passion. You don't, if you're not all in, this might not be the career or industry for you.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's very dynamic, but then I think it can also be a bit of a volatile industry, and there's so much to it. Even as I've sort of come along in my career, there's definitely facets of the industry that I would never pretend to know much about, and for me it's sort of marketing and branding that I have so much respect for people that have a talent for that, because I definitely don't. And I think there's so much work that goes into every part of the industry, and like I said, there's the vineyard, the winery, then there's marketing, because it's all well and good for us to grow it and make it, but if someone's got to sell it as well, and I don't think have that skill set, but obviously fortunate to work with people that are born for that sort of work, and it shows.
Makes you think about, if you're using the analogy of a conveyor belt or something like that, to generate the bottle of wine, it takes, a village realistically. It's not just squeezing some grapes into a bottle and slapping a label on it. It's the design of the bottle, it's the flavour, it's the vintage, it's actually making the wine physically, but then also how you're going to promote it, how many are you going to make, how much we're going to sell it for, what's our target audience, what kind of notes do we want from this. Like, there's a lot of complexity around wine, which I think a lot of people don't understand. I remember being a younger gentleman when I first started sort of drinking. I was probably early mid-20s, and I remember someone at a cellar door. I was Deso, and thank you, Lamb. I'll have a little bit more of a splash. That's quite nice, that long of you. And I remember the cellar door staff member saying, try it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. If you do, you do. At the end of the day, you could get notes of cherry or, blackberry or chocolate or whatever it was. Obviously, we were going through some reds. He gave me some really great advice, which just kind of stuck with me. You either like it or you don't, and that's fine. Like I said, we all have different strokes for different folks, whatever floats your boat, all those kind of things. There seems to be a lot of, I don't know what the technical term is, stigma or arty-fartiness. There's a pretentiousness around wine sometimes, $1,000 bottle of Grange and, whatever it might be. And, it's a luxury item, let's be fair. But can you get the same kind of quality from, a clean skin?
Oh, look, I think, one thing I've always told people, and, when I was younger, I was working in cellar doors, whilst I was studying, and, I think it's, in a way, it's a bit of a shame that there's that sort of misconception that you have to know a lot about it or understand a lot about it to enjoy it. And people would come into, to the cellar doors I was working in and sort of get quite intimidated. And it's like, ultimately, we're all experts, because if you don't like it, you don't like it. If you love it, you love it. Yeah, exactly. So okay, I might be able to tell you intricately where it's come from or how it was made or what I think it might, what it should taste like. But ultimately, it's up to you. It's up to the person drinking it, and whether they're an expert, a sommelier, whether it's $5, $10,000. The idea is to drink it. We don't make it for people to look at. So
I mean, that's very fair.
mm,
I think a lot of it is associated well with the experience.
mm,
You're usually in a beautiful cellar door. You're getting really good customer service. You've normally got a cheese board. You're in good company.
mm,
The wine is flowing. I love the romanticy, the romance of wine, because
mm,
you could be sitting in front of the fire on a cold wintry night. You could be overlooking a beach in the middle of Italy and having a fantastic time. You could
mm,
be in, the Napa Valley or whatnot in California and
mm,
having a very unique Pinot Noir. Like, there's a lot of experience that comes from that, as in just life experience and enjoyment,
mm,
which, I think, it's a very fascinating industry you're in.
mm. Yep. No, exactly. There's so much beauty in sort of those sorts of experiences, and I've kept empty bottles of things I've shared with people, or things I've been given, not because I don't have there's certainly bottles I've been lucky enough to drink that have been of a certain dollar value, or with a history behind the label or the brand. But the bottles I've kept to kind of look back on and remember have been things I've celebrated, people I've celebrated. That for me is the real beauty of it. And my family's not in the wine industry, and I'll sort of bring something really nice to dinner, and my siblings get a bit intimidated by it and feel bad if I offer it to them because they don't understand it, or they don't comprehend it in the same way that I do. But ultimately, it's like, I bought it to share, I bought it to drink. It's I spent a lot of time with my papa, who back in his sort of younger days collected a lot of wine, and as he got a bit older, he unfortunately couldn't really drink it anymore because of some health issues he had, and so he sort of started sharing some of his cellar with me, which was beautiful. And one thing he said to me I'll never forget was that he'd given me a specific bottle, really famous producer, famous label, and I think I went back and saw him maybe a few months later, or however long it was, and he asked me if I'd had it yet, and I said no. I was waiting for for an occasion, and he told me off, and he was like, you never know when you'll get to be like me, and the doctor has essentially banned him from drinking, and he had all this wine in the cellar and he couldn't touch it, and ultimately a Thursday afternoon in Crafers that's an occasion, so why not enjoy something really special? And if you're at a fancy restaurant, if it's Monday afternoon and you're cleaning the house, whatever, it's you can make an occasion of anything. It's one of those
things for all occasions, isn't it?
Exactly.
There's a quite a popular quote that I hear often, and I don't know the specifics of where it originated, but the phrase is life's too short for cheap wine. And I think there's a different, cheap wine. When I think cheap wine, I'm thinking maybe cask wine, which again sometimes can't be cheap wine. It's maybe just mass-produced wine, a bit different.
Yep.
But I mean, that's the beauty of wine, is it's so versatile. There's so many opportunities for different avenues, and you've got whites, you've got reds, you've got rosés, you've got bubbles, you've got sweet dessert wines, port, tawnies. There's so many options. It's fantastic, realistically.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate adulting, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly. We're, again, very fortunate, especially in Australia and in South Australia. But for me, cheap wine is, I think for me it's more, life's too short for bad wine maybe, and bad wine obviously is, that's entirely subjective. I've tried plenty of wine that's, worth quite a lot of money, and some of my favourite bottles of wine are, worth $30, and you can pick them up from just about any bottle shop in, certainly in South Australia in my case. And I've obviously fortunate, but I've tried some wines that, we're supposed to worship and revere, and to be honest, I haven't been all that impressed. So
It's very fair.
I think when I was working in McLaren Vale, specifically, I remember the most expensive bottle of wine you could buy from a cellar door was absolutely nowhere near what I would call the sort of best or the best value wine available. And I think it was less than half the price for a wine that I believe, and I think a lot of other people believed, was far superior in terms of just drinkability and quality. And yeah, sometimes I guess it's like that sort of old. Yeah, it's like, why does a Gucci handbag cost more than a Kmart handbag when it's ultimately probably made in the same place, or don't look all that much different.
It's value based on priorities and what you what you appreciate, and who are we to judge if someone wants a Gucci handbag? But then don't drink alcohol. That's, like we're all different. So
exactly, and I think again, wine's so it's the cool thing about it. I've tried some incredible wines, tried some expensive wines, tried some cheap wines, tried some terrible wines, and ultimately it's all. Most people would probably disagree with me, just on those assessments. I've worked in cellar doors where people have been absolutely, bowled over by the price. And in the same day, I've had people complain about the price, and then other people can't believe how cheap it is based on how good it is. So I think it's all very subjective, and if it's if it's in a bag that's in a box, great. If that's your thing, go for it.
I'm a pro clean skin person. I don't drink clean skins, regularly, but I always go on the basis that a clean skin is over poor. Is they made 10,000 labels and 11,000 bottles of wine were able to be produced. That's how I explain it to myself.
Yeah.
Am I right in that?
There's definitely, that's one sort of way that you might end up with some clean skins in a, whether it's a bottle shop or a pub or whatever it might be. It might just be like a house pour, so it's sort of made under contract for a venue, by a winery that might have their own sort of established label, and then it's sort of an agreement where they're buying the wine, but they're not, the winery is selling the wine, but not wanting to have their name on it, in the setting that it's in. Where I work, we make the sort of, quote unquote house sparkling of a really beautiful restaurant. But it's at no point, if you go to that restaurant, would you sort of like, you don't get told that it's our wine, but we're growing it, we're producing it. I look after the vineyards that are on the grounds of the restaurant, and then we make the wine. But it's sort of just the house pour sparkling wine of this restaurant, but it's not, so it's a clean skin. But it's if I'm allowed to to brag, it's an incredible bottle of wine.
Brag away.
It's just not. So clean skin could be anything. It could just be, like you say, a sort of an overrun of bottles to labels. It could be anything. I mean, I made some wine a few years ago that I just didn't quite make enough of it to justify. Labeling is quite expensive. It's a good wine. I'm proud of it. I'm happy with it. But it's just not. It's financially, it's just not a good decision to come up with a label, to come up with everything that I need to. So it's sitting around somewhere, quite a few boxes, but it's just not worth it necessarily financially. Even though quality wise, I'd like to think it's. It's not terrible. It's not engine cleaner, but it's I've only got, I think, maybe 14 dozen or so. So it's just not.
Just a small vintage.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not worth the financial cost to label it.
There's a lot that goes into the labeling. You've got to get. I think a lot of people just assume it's just the front label and design, but you've got to get the contents. You've got to get. Usually, then a barcode has to get put on there. Then do you put the collar around the neck of the bottle? Like it. You sit there and you go, that's a potential additional cost that might not need to be in place, or
Yep. No, absolutely.
and we're not talking this is grandma's hooch that she's made in her carport. We're talking proper,
Mm.
made wine as well. So
Yeah.
it's a horse for courses. I know some
Yep.
people who only drink clean skins, and that's their intention is to.
Mm.
They love the surprise of it,
Mm.
which I think is quite cool.
Yep.
It says that it's a red. It's either a cab sav or a blend.
Yeah.
And they might go, oh, I really like that, and then they get the same day next year and they go, oh, it's different now.
Mm.
So they might not be as keen.
Yep.
Can I ask you, where do you sit on the cork? A bit of a controversial avenue there.
Yeah, that's.
And I'm sorry, I'm asking a bit of a random. This conversation's all over the place.
It's a great question, and it's a again within the industry, it's a funny, it's a never-ending conversation. I think the misconception that consumers have is that good wine is under cork. I can definitely categorically say that that's not true. My favourite producer in McLaren Vale, who I think makes the sort of best value, best quality wine, puts it under screw cap. I've had some absolutely awful wines that have been under cork. That's definitely not a marker of quality. Back in the day, probably sort of going back now 20, 30 years plus, cork, and still comes from a cork tree, and it used to be that it was literally just taken straight out of the tree in the shape that you see it and know it in the bottle. So the trees could have diseases or pests in there that then obviously affect the cork.
Which ultimately is affecting the taste
which
of the wine.
affects the wine, exactly. Yeah. These days, most corks that you see would be, certainly the majority of it is cork, but it's actually taken out of the tree, blasted up and then put back together. It's been cleaned, sanitized, and essentially glued back together. I worked in a cellar door for I think about 6 years, and most of our reds were under cork. Literally zero. I never had a single cork or a single person come back and say that the wine was corked or faulty because of the cork. Because these days, like I said, it's I'm probably lucky if it's 60-70% cork, the rest of it's glue, and it's obviously been cleaned and treated. And again, it's that sort of thing with the sulfur of if you're going to go to that much effort to make the wine, grow the wine, make the wine, bottle the wine, you're not going to just put we're going to be serious about how we seal it. But the screw cap debate and the cork debate's it's an interesting one, and I think screw cap now, especially in Australia, is definitely the far and away the dominant closure.
You don't get cork decay, so if you are going to sell us something, there is some romance around cork. And, it does look fantastic when you pop that cork. I'm a slut for that cork.
Yeah, it sounds good. It looks good. It's especially if you're at a restaurant or something. There is a bit of magic to it that you don't get from cracking open a screw cap. But
how many bottles of wine over the years have been ruined by they've been cellared and maybe they've been horizontal, they haven't been rotated, and the corks dissolved away, broken down into the wine.
Yeah, no, I've definitely had a few that I very sadly sort of held on to maybe for too long, or maybe they were faulty to begin with. I had a 5-litre bottle of beautiful some Barossa Cabernet, and I had it laying horizontally. Did all the things you're meant to do, and then I realised on the floor, kind of underneath my wine rack, there was it had actually started dripping.
No.
And it had come out of the cork and through the wax seal, and that's I think it's a 2004 or 5 bottle of Cabernet from a really sort of quite famous producer, and obviously I was looking forward to it. And if there's a hole big enough for the wine to leak out, there's a hole big enough for the oxygen to leak in. So sadly, that wine's probably...
You've got vinegar.
I've got 5 litres of cooking wine, I think, sadly.
Okay. That's really upsetting to hear. That sucks.
Yeah, it's
That absolutely sucks.
yeah, and you know, in a masochistic sort of way, that's kind of you know, it's not addictive or, but you know, it's a bit like with growing grapes. You know, you just never know. You have the perfect season, and then it rains or it hails a bit too hard. You know, on a morning
It
the
is
week
quite.
before harvest, and then
It's quite subjective to the weather. I should say
yeah,
for listeners' reference, we've just cracked a bottle of Anvers Shiraz. We are actively looking for sponsors. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But cheers.
cheers. Yeah,
It smells nice.
comes from a beautiful part of the world. I grew up not far from Ambers, so
As is, we are so lucky. Like
it's
generally,
yeah.
we're so lucky. You think
Oh,
about
it's such a yeah,
you've got beautiful Rieslings. You know, you've got Clare Valley. You've got
yeah,
Hills. You've got Southeast isn't that far away.
yeah. No, exactly.
I
Well,
love.
absolutely
I could sit
spoiled.
here and chat to you about wine all day because I love the fantasy that comes with it.
Yeah,
You got me reminiscing. I remember being a broke as shit uni student, and at the time, my girlfriend, who is now my beautiful wife, she worked in a cellar door, and she used to bring home, you know, the bottles that didn't get finished. And I remember staying up until, 1, 2 a.m. studying, and she'd get home, and we'd sit there on the couch, a shitty $50 couch that we got from Marketplace, and we'd be drinking a $200 bottle of wine. And I just remember being like, this is fantastic. And I still think of that often.
yeah,
Because we would just sit there and just chat and debrief and relax over a lovely glass of wine. And it made us feel special. We could never afford to buy, particularly at that time, we could never afford to buy the bottles of wine that we were drinking. And yeah, it might have been a quarter of a bottle or half a bottle if we were lucky, but it was really nice. And I think there's quite a lot of satisfaction that comes from enjoying a glass of wine. Whether it's in good company, there's a wine for every variety, for every occasion. Let's be fair.
yeah. No, absolutely. And again, that's to me, that's the beauty and the appeal of it all. Is yeah, I remember being in probably similar situations, and even at uni, when I was a student, of wine, we would so obviously a lot of our classes would involve drinking wine, and we were lucky enough to be able to sort of fight over the whatever was left over, and yeah, so and very fortunate that the uni would provide us with some incredible wines, again, just in terms of price, but also in terms of more importantly history and quality, and so again, yeah, being that sort of broke student, eating 2-minute noodles or fucking rice,
Rice,
but then
rice
having a $500
veggies.
bottle of Pinot that had been imported from Burgundy, or there was no end to the sort of quality. And I remember doing tastings, doing master classes and tasting sessions on champagne, especially was the sort of popular one, because we'd start with $5 bottles of Aussie sparkling, and then we'd finish the afternoon with bottles of French vintage champagne with 4 figures in the price, and then again, we'd, like I said, we'd fight over the
Very fair.
the dregs, and
you want just whatever you can.
take home your $500 bottle of champagne and have it with your 2-minute noodles for dinner. It was great.
What a combo.
Yeah.
We are getting to our time. My one last silly question: if I was a genie and I could snap my fingers and we could go to all around the globe, any vintage, any time, this is magic here, obviously, full of bullshit, but what would your ultimate pick be? And I know that's a really hard question to answer because it's, what's your favourite meal, what's your favourite movie, all that kind of thing, but is there anything that stands out that you go, yeah, that's, or a region in general, or a year, anything along those lines?
Yeah, that's a great question, and
it's a very open-ended question.
For the amount of times I get asked, I should have a better answer. But I've always, since pretty early on getting into wine and the industry, I've probably always had a soft spot for Italian wines, and specifically reds. I just think the way they approach viticulture, winemaking, and more importantly, drinking wine, I think is so beautiful. In Italy, there's, whether it's €5, whether it's €1,000, it's the whole point is to drink it, and the philosophy is very much, share it, cook a nice meal, and it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to spend $100 on cuts of meat at the butcher, whatever it is. It's about sharing it, and I think, it probably sounds a bit wanky or a bit pretentious, but I feel like that sort of shows in a lot of the wines, and just there's a drinkability to them, even if they're these incredible, big heavy reds that are sort of made to be cellared. There's just an approachability to, most Italian wines that I think for me is, you just can't beat. And specifically, I've always loved Sangiovese. So for me, Chianti, which is in Tuscany, is probably my, again, fortunate enough to have been there a couple of times, and just a stunning part of the world, just sort of geographically, but beautiful people, beautiful food, beautiful wine, obviously.
It's ingrained in their culture, isn't it?
Exactly.
It tastes like Nonna's feet. It's
that's it.
It's something else.
Yeah, no. So I think for me, my desert island wine would be Chianti. So Sangiovese, and which we're also so lucky that in South Australia, Sangiovese grows really well here. It's fun to grow. It's fun to make. But definitely there's a magic to the sort of traditional Italian styles of it. But I love it. I've been fortunate enough to be able to make Sangiovese of my own in Australia, and drink a lot of beautiful Italian styles of it. And so I think gun to my head, it would be I'd want to go to Tuscany and just sit in a vineyard, eat some cheese, eat some cold cut meats, and
and just watch the world go by.
Just bake in the sun.
I mean, that sounds fantastic. Let's be honest. We are at time. I did tell. I mentioned this before before we started recording. That I did mention I was interviewing yourself to a few friends and on socials and such, and wholeheartedly the response was to please thank you. To be like, thank you for doing God's work.
That's beautiful.
Not that I'm religious, but
no.
I think a lot of people, and I'm not trying to go down the avenue of substance abuse or anything like that, but I think a lot of individuals believe and take a lot of comfort in just a Thursday night glass of wine, whatever it might be, that just, it just sometimes it's an incredible way to just enjoy yourself in a very simplistic way, which is just, so it's a very giving avenue in my opinion. So thank you on behalf of society for doing the great work that you do.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, we like I said, we don't make it to look at it, so we couldn't keep doing it if people weren't buying it and drinking it and enjoying it. And so it's very humbling. It's a nice thing to hear, and definitely, like I said, we make it for people to drink, so
keep going,
within reason, of course.
Keep making it, please keep making it.
No, absolutely. I'll never stop. I love it.
All right, that's our time done. Thank you so much again.
Oh,
thank you for giving up your time. Thank you
so
for enjoying
much.
these lovely jobs with me as well.
Beautiful. Thank you for bringing them.
Very, very, very keen to try the Shiraz now as well.
Yeah,
so cheers.
beautiful.
Thank you guys
so much.